The wind howled across the open Wyoming plains, hurling rain in relentless sheets that hammered the roof of Kate Morgan's battered old pickup. Lightning sliced the dusk sky, turning the world silver for a split second, then plunging it back into a hungry darkness. Thunder cracked, and the sound seemed to crawl straight down Kate's spine, rattling her nerves as she guided her truck slowly down the flooded dirt road. Each bump and pothole made her knuckles whiten against the wheel, but she kept going. Something felt wrong out here tonight. Something was pulling her forward, as if fate itself were guiding her deeper into the storm. The storm was the kind that made every sensible person stay inside, but Kate wasn't one for comfort or easy choices. Not anymore. Ever since she left the rodeo circuit and gave up her life as a celebrated horse veterinarian, she'd wandered the backcountry like a restless spirit, never staying long in any one place. She thought she'd found a kind of peace out here. Her only companion, a gentle old mare named Willow, grazing quietly at whatever campsite Kate chose for the night. But tonight, the peace had been shattered. The world outside was wild and raw, and so was the scream that had ripped through the darkness just a few minutes ago. A sound that made her stop in her tracks. It wasn't a human scream. Kate knew animal pain when she heard it. And it was close. Too close to ignore. She killed the engine and grabbed her flashlight. Rain battered her as she stepped out, boots sinking into mud up to her ankles. She hesitated only a second before grabbing the old rope she always kept behind the seat, her instincts from years working with wild horses kicking in. Even out here alone, old habits died hard. She ducked beneath the barbed wire fence at the edge of the road, the wind almost tearing her hat from her head, and sloshed through waist-high grass toward the sound. Branches whipped her face, stinging her cheeks. She could barely hear anything over the wind and thunder. But there it was again. A strangled, desperate noise. Closer, her heart thudded with both fear and anticipation. A bolt of lightning lit up the prairie. And that's when she saw him. A horse. A wild Mustang, big and powerful, black and white patches streaked with mud, standing out like a phantom against the storm. But he wasn't moving. He was down on one knee, neck stretched forward, chains biting deep into his hind legs, anchoring him to a rusted metal post someone had driven into the ground. He looked half-crazed with pain and terror, froth flecking his lips. His eyes rolled white in the darkness, and when he saw Kate, he lashed out, hooves slamming into the mud. "Easy, easy, boy," she called out, voice steady despite her own pounding heart. "I'm here to help, I swear." He didn't understand. All he knew was the pain, the panic, and the storm that refused to let up. The chain rattled as he struggled, each movement digging the links deeper into his skin. Blood mixed with mud in dark streaks along his legs. Kate's gut twisted at the sight. Who would do this, she thought? Who would leave a creature out here to die like this? She edged closer, hands up, rope at her side, speaking in the low, even tones she'd used 1,000 times with injured horses. "Shh, it's okay. I won't hurt you, I promise." Another flash of lightning, and the Mustang lunged again, eyes wild. Kate had to leap back to avoid a flying hoof. Mud splattered her jeans, but she refused to give up. She crouched, lowering herself to appear less threatening, letting the rain soak through her clothes and plaster her hair to her face. "Hey, easy, fella. You're not alone now," she murmured, inching closer, heart hammering in her chest. She could see now that the chain wasn't just around one leg. It was tangled up in both, with part of it buried deep in the mud. He must have fought for hours, maybe longer. The storm raged on, thunder rolling so loud she could barely hear herself think. Her hands trembled as she fumbled with the rope, using it to try to gently steady the Mustang's head. The horse snorted, flared his nostrils, and thrashed, but Kate's calm presence seemed to cut through the fear just barely. For a brief second, their eyes met. His were wide, wild, desperate, but in them, she saw a flicker of hope. She took a chance. Stepping to his side, she yanked her pocket knife from her belt and began sawing at the chain, praying it would hold until she could free him. The rain made everything slippery, the mud threatening to swallow her boots. She worked quickly, ignoring the freezing water running down her back, the cramps in her legs, the ache in her hands. The Mustang jerked, nearly sending her sprawling, but she hung on, whispering softly, "Hang in there. Almost got it, buddy." Almost. At last, with a final heave, the chain gave way. The Mustang staggered, half collapsing into the mud, but he was free. Kate staggered back, breathing hard, as the horse stared at her, uncertain, trembling, powerful. For a heartbeat, the world went still. Then, with a sudden burst of energy, the Mustang bolted. He took off into the darkness, dragging a length of broken chain behind him, his hooves churning up the earth, mane flying wild in the storm. "Wait!" Kate called after him, but her voice was lost to the wind. She stood alone in the rain, soaked to the bone, mud clinging to her jeans, breath coming in ragged gasps. She could barely see past the tears and raindrops streaking her face. Her heart felt split in two, one half aching for the horse's pain, the other burning with a strange, fierce hope. Somewhere out there in the darkness, the Mustang was free. Chained, wounded, but free. And she knew, with a deep certainty, that their story was far from over. Lightning flashed one more time, illuminating the muddy field, the broken chain, and the empty sky where a wild spirit had disappeared into the storm. Kate stood silent, shivering, her hands still curled around the rope. In that moment, she made a silent promise. She would find him again, no matter what it took. When dawn finally bled across the Wyoming plains, it brought no peace to Kate Morgan. She hadn't slept. Even inside her battered tent, pitched on the edge of a lonely patch of sage and cottonwood, the night had been a blur of restless tossing, distant thunder, and worry that knotted her insides. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving the world washed raw and new. But Kate couldn't shake the memory of that wild Mustang, his eyes wide and haunted, disappearing into darkness with that jagged chain still trailing from his leg. By sunrise, a fine mist lingered over the sodden grass, and Kate was already pulling on her mud-stained boots. She forced herself to eat a couple bites of a granola bar, but it tasted like cardboard. Her thoughts were already a mile away, out there, where the Mustang might be bleeding, tangled, or worse. Willow, her steady old mare, stood at the edge of the clearing, watching her with quiet concern. Kate gave her a gentle pat on the neck. "Watch the camp, girl. I have to see if he made it." The land was quiet, the sky a soft, bruised blue, birds just starting to chatter as Kate set out. She carried her rope and knife just in case, and every step squished in the rain-soaked earth. The air was thick with the scent of wet sage, mud, and something else. Fear, maybe. Or desperation. She followed the deep hoofprints leading away from where she'd cut the chain, her heart thumping with dread and determination. The trail was easy enough to follow at first. Fresh, churned mud, a streak where the chain had dragged, and broken brush. But as the land sloped gently toward a stand of old cottonwoods, the prints scattered and doubled back. Kate slowed, crouching, fingers brushing the grass. Here and there, dark stains marked the ground. Blood, and not a little of it. Kate's mouth went dry. He can't have gone far, she thought. Not in that state. A sudden bird call startled her, and she almost slipped in the muck. She pressed on, weaving through waist-high sage and down a narrow animal trail, eyes scanning every shadow. Then she heard it, a sound that stopped her cold. Not a scream this time, but a harsh, labored breathing, the rattling kind that meant exhaustion and pain. She crept forward, heart hammering. And there he was. The Mustang had collapsed in a tangle of fallen branches and thorny brush, half hidden in the early morning mist. The chain was wound tighter around his legs, and he was sprawled on his side, chest heaving, eyes rolling with panic when he caught sight of her. He tried to scramble up, but the brush held him fast, and he let out a sharp, terrified whinny. Kate froze, her mind racing with every lesson she'd learned from years with wild horses. Don't rush, don't threaten. Speak slow, soft, and low. "Hey there, big guy," she said, barely above a whisper. "It's me, the one from last night. I'm here to help. Promise." The Mustang thrashed, kicking at the brush. The chain clanged and rattled. Kate held her breath, moving just a hair closer, arms loose at her sides. Every muscle in her body screamed to run, but she held her ground. "It's all right. I know you're scared," she murmured, step by careful step. "But you're not alone anymore." She got down on one knee, keeping her posture low. The horse watched her, every muscle quivering, nostrils flared wide as the scent of mud, sweat, and blood filled the air. Slowly, Kate set her rope aside and pulled the knife from her belt, showing it openly. No tricks, no sudden moves. "Let's get you out of this mess, huh?" she said, her voice trembling only a little. It took long, agonizing minutes. Kate talked the whole time, weaving nonsense stories and soft reassurances, barely daring to breathe when the horse's panic flared. With every careful movement, she snipped away at the tangled brush, freeing his legs inch by inch. At one point, the Mustang's head jerked dangerously close, teeth bared. But Kate didn't flinch. Finally, the last branch snapped free, and the chain lay loose on the ground. The horse was free, wary, trembling, battered, but free. This time, instead of bolting, the Mustang stayed down, sides heaving. His eyes were no longer wild with terror, just clouded with exhaustion and a flicker of hope. Kate waited, not pushing, letting the animal decide what happened next. Minutes ticked by. The world was quiet, save for the distant trill of a meadowlark. The Mustang slowly, carefully struggled to his feet. He stood tall and proud, though every movement was stiff with pain and fatigue. His black and white coat shone dully in the weak sunlight, marked with mud and scars. He didn't run. Kate reached out, slow as the sunrise, hand open. "Easy now. No more chains, no more pain." To her shock, the Mustang allowed her to come closer. Inch by inch, Kate closed the distance, barely breathing. Then, with the lightest touch, she brushed her fingers against his neck, just once. The horse shivered, but didn't move away. For a brief, miraculous moment, human and wild horse stood together in silent understanding. No rope, no force, just trust, fragile and real. Kate's eyes stung with relief. "That's it, boy. You're all right now." The Mustang let her stroke his mane, his body tense but not panicked. He pawed the ground, ears flicking, as if testing the boundaries of this strange new trust. For a heartbeat, Kate wanted to wrap her arms around his neck and weep with joy, but she didn't dare. She just stood there, palm on his neck, feeling his pulse, his warmth, his life. Then, with a toss of his head, the Mustang stepped back. He eyed her, uncertain, and for a second Kate wondered if he'd bolt again. But he didn't flee, not yet. Instead, he turned his head, looking back over his shoulder at the open plains. Freedom was calling. Kate stepped away, hands raised. "Go on then. The wild's waiting." The Mustang lingered as if torn. Then he spun, the broken chain clinking in the grass, and loped off into the brightening morning. This time his gait was steadier, less frantic, but every step was a declaration of wild spirit and survival. Kate watched him go, heart soaring and aching all at once. She didn't know if she'd ever see him again, but for now that didn't matter. Today, she'd given him a second chance, and for one perfect moment, she'd been allowed into his world, not as a conqueror, but as a friend. The mist lifted. The plains stretched wide and wild, whispering with the promise of more stories, more second chances, and the wild hope of redemption. The hills around Kate's camp glowed gold beneath the early morning sun, the grass still beaded with dew, every scent and sound sharpened by the long, sleepless night. She stood motionless at the edge of her makeshift fire ring, watching the distant rise where Thunder, the wild Mustang, had disappeared minutes before. Her heartbeat echoed in her ears, not from adrenaline now, but from the hollow ache of letting go. Willow, Kate's old mare, nosed her gently, seeking reassurance and maybe a little breakfast. Kate reached to scratch her neck, grateful for the familiar touch, but her thoughts drifted far from the campsite. The earth felt empty somehow, as if the Mustang's wild energy had briefly filled the world, then left a silence behind. She knelt and added a log to the fading fire, prodding the embers until they flared with reluctant heat. Her hands, smeared with mud and blood from last night's ordeal, trembled a little as she reached for her weathered leather journal, the one she'd carried since the day she walked away from the rodeo. Flicking it open to a blank page, she pressed the pen to paper and forced herself to write. June 11th, Wyoming, sunrise. Letting go feels harder than holding on. I keep asking if I did the right thing, but there's no one here to answer. Only this empty field, the echo of his hooves, and the hush after a storm. She paused, remembering the chain biting deep into Thunder's leg, the terror in his eyes, the wary trust when he let her touch his neck. So many times before, in another life, she would have roped him, forced him into a pen, called it saving. She would have used all her skills, her voice, her hands, her stubbornness, to bend his wildness into something safe, predictable, and, in the eyes of the rodeo, useful. But not this time. Kate closed her eyes and listened to the distant wind, to Willow's quiet breathing, to the gentle popping of the fire. Her mind traveled back to nights years ago, to crowds cheering, to the blinding arena lights and the smell of sweat and fear. She saw herself, smiling, proud, standing next to a Mustang she'd broken. She remembered the applause, the praise, but she also remembered the eyes of those horses, dulled by defeat, not peace. How many did I save by taking away their freedom? Did I ever really help them, or just make them tame? She wrote the questions in her journal, let the ink blur with a few stray raindrops still clinging to her sleeve. Her hand hovered, then scrawled the words she'd never said aloud. I don't want to break another spirit. I want to give them a chance to stay wild, even if that means I never see them again. Tears pricked her eyes, but she blinked them away. She wasn't a woman given to easy emotion. Life on the road had taught her that heartbreak was part of every real rescue, the animals or her own. But the ache in her chest was sharp. It was the ache of someone who had finally understood the true cost of compassion, letting go, not keeping close. Willow nudged her again, blowing softly into Kate's hair. Kate smiled and leaned her forehead against her old mare's cheek. You understand, don't you, girl? She murmured. You know what it means to choose your own path. The day passed slow and quiet. Kate moved through camp like a sleepwalker, feeding Willow, mending a frayed stirrup, reheating coffee until it was more mud than drink. Each task gave her hands something to do, but her mind wandered, replaying every moment with Thunder, every risk, every doubt. She walked the edge of the clearing, searching the horizon, but there was only sky and waving grass. In the afternoon, she tried to nap, but woke tangled in her sleeping bag, heart pounding from a dream she couldn't remember. She wondered if Thunder had made it far, or if he'd find water, or if he'd ever forgive the scars left by the chain. She didn't blame him if he hated her. She blamed herself. As the sun set, Kate sat by her fire again, journal on her lap. The sky flamed orange, shadows deepening around her camp. She flipped to a fresh page and wrote, "I was trained to control, not to trust. But trust is the only thing that matters now. Tonight I hope he's free, somewhere out there in the wild. I hope he remembers not my hands, but my heart." She let the journal fall shut, gaze distant and unfocused. In the quiet, she replayed conversations she'd had with other trainers, with cowboys and rodeo fans, with herself. There had always been a line between tame and wild. Today, for the first time, she saw that the line ran right through her own life, too. She wondered if she could ever go back to the person she'd been, the woman who could force an animal to submit and call it love. She knew the answer, though. Thunder's wild eyes haunted her, yes, but they'd also set her free. The kindness she'd shown him was also a kindness to herself, the courage to walk away, to let someone else's spirit remain unbroken. Willow settled at her feet, eyes half closed, trusting that Kate would keep her safe. Kate stroked the mare's mane, her hand moving slowly, thoughtfully. "I can't make up for the past," Kate whispered to the empty air, "but I can choose better now." She looked up at the stars emerging one by one, brilliant, untamed, full of ancient stories. Out there somewhere, Thunder was running free beneath the same sky. Maybe she'd see him again. Maybe not. What mattered was that she'd given him a real choice. Kate smiled, the sadness gentled by a sense of peace she hadn't felt in years. Tonight, the wild had one more horse, and maybe, just maybe, she'd found a little more freedom herself. Days drifted by in slow, golden rhythms beneath the endless Wyoming sky. The world had dried from the storm. Sagebrush gleamed silver in the mornings, and the hills rippled with wind like the muscles of sleeping animals. Kate Morgan's camp settled into its usual patterns, but inside, she felt nothing was the same. Thunder, the wild Mustang, haunted her every waking thought. Each morning, Kate rose early. She brewed strong black coffee on the smoky fire, careful not to let it boil over as she watched the sun stretch over the ridgeline. Willow, her steadfast mare, nickered for her grain. Kate fed and brushed her, grateful for Willow's soft brown eyes and gentle presence. Yet while her hands moved through the familiar motions of camp life, feeding, cleaning tack, checking water, her mind was always elsewhere, scanning the horizon, listening for distant hoofbeats, hoping for a flicker of black and white among the swaying grass. Some evenings, Kate wandered the edge of her campsite, boots crunching through wildflowers and brittle weeds, eyes straining to catch a glimpse of Thunder against the fading light. Sometimes a shadow would dart in the tall grass, sending her heart racing. Just a pronghorn, or a coyote, or a trick of the wind. But every time her hope flared, only to gutter out in disappointment. Nights were the hardest. After supper, she sat by the dying fire with her battered journal in her lap, trying to write but finding only fragments, half-formed questions, sketches of Thunder's wild mane. memories of the chain she'd cut free. The quiet pressed in around her, and the loneliness gnawed at the edges of her resolve. One evening, as the moon climbed fat and yellow, Kate poured herself a mug of weak coffee and stared into the flames. Willow grazed quietly nearby, ears flicking in the breeze. The hush was broken only by crickets and the distant yip of coyotes. Kate thumbed open her journal and wrote, "Sometimes the kindest thing is to set someone free, even if it hurts like hell. But I keep asking, was it really kindness, or just running from my own guilt? If Thunder never comes back, will I be able to live with that choice?" Her hand trembled a little as she set down the pen. She knew what some would say. Mustangs are wild, dangerous, a threat to the ranchers' herds and fences. People in these parts didn't always appreciate outsiders who meddled with nature. But Kate couldn't shake the feeling that Thunder's fate was somehow tied to her own, as if his freedom could redeem her mistakes. The next afternoon, while repairing a split stirrup near her truck, a pickup rumbled up the dusty road. Kate recognized her neighbor, Ben Hall, a weathered man with sun-cracked skin and a hat as old as the hills. He pulled up with a screech of gravel, eyeing Kate's camp with skeptical curiosity. "Morning, Kate. Still here, huh?" Ben called, leaning out his window. "Morning, Ben. Haven't worn out my welcome yet," she replied with a half-smile, wiping sweat from her brow. Ben's gaze drifted to Willow, then to the distant hills. "Heard you were out in that storm the other night. Folks say you're chasing wild horses. You know, it's not always wise to mess with them Mustangs. They got a way of breaking more than just fences." Kate shrugged, feeling defensive. Sometimes they need help. That one, he was in real bad shape. Ben's eyes narrowed, measuring her. "Help's one thing. Trying to make friends with wildness is another. My old man used to say, 'Let wild things be wild. Otherwise, you'll just end up heartbroken or in the hospital.'" He gave her a searching look, then softened. "Just don't go getting yourself hurt on account of a horse that doesn't want taming." "I'm not trying to tame him," Kate said quietly. "I just wanted to give him a chance." Ben shook his head but didn't argue further. "You always did have a stubborn streak, Morgan. Just remember, nature doesn't owe us anything. Sometimes the best thing we can do is leave things be." With a last tip of his hat, he rumbled away, leaving Kate standing in a cloud of dust, his words echoing in her mind. All day they stayed with her. The doubts, the warnings, the ache of waiting for a sign that might never come. She kept busy with chores, scrubbing pans, checking Willow's shoes, patching a tear in her rainfly. Yet every idle moment, her eyes strayed to the distant ridges, longing and hope fighting for space in her chest. As twilight settled, painting the world in dusky lavender and rose, Kate scribbled in her journal again. "I can't control what happens out there. All I can do is wait, and hope the kindness I offered meant something. Even if he never returns, I have to believe setting him free was right." She read the words back, searching them for comfort. They felt honest, if not comforting. She closed her eyes and let her mind wander to the wild places Thunder might be. A sunlit meadow, a rocky stream, the wind in his tangled mane. She imagined him running, not from fear, but for the pure joy of being alive, untamed, unbroken. The days stretched on, each one a lesson in patience and humility. Kate learned to find meaning in the small rituals, brushing Willow until her coat gleamed, boiling water for coffee, patching worn gear. She told herself she could wait as long as it took, that Thunder owed her nothing, but every night, beneath the vast star-flung sky, she whispered a silent wish. Come back if you want to. I'll be here." And somehow, in the waiting, Kate found the edges of her old restlessness begin to soften. She was still haunted by regret, but it was tempered now by the knowledge that she had chosen mercy over pride. For the first time in years, she let herself imagine a life shaped not by conquest, but by trust. Trust in herself, and in the wild spirit she'd set free. Maybe Thunder would return. Maybe he wouldn't. But the waiting taught her this. Some gifts, once given, are never wasted. And sometimes, the kindest thing you can do is let someone go, even as your own heart stays open, hoping, patient, and wild. It started as an ordinary evening, the kind Kate had grown to love. Soft twilight spilling gold and mauve across the open hills, the prairie wind settling into a gentle hush, Willow cropping quietly at sweet spring grass just a stone's throw from the edge of camp. Kate moved through the usual chores, scrubbing her tin plate, checking the fire, humming an old rodeo tune she half remembered from childhood. There was a rare peace in the air, as if the world itself was holding its breath. But sometimes peace is only the pause before a storm. As dusk settled in, Kate grabbed her leather gloves and a burlap sack, deciding to gather some deadwood before dark. "Won't be long, girl," she called to Willow, who lifted her head and snorted in reply. Kate wandered out a little farther than usual, drawn by a patch of downed cottonwoods she'd spotted earlier that week. She was nearly done, arms full of sticks and twigs, when a prickle of unease crawled up her spine. At first she thought it was just the wind, a sudden chill that made her clutch her jacket tighter. Then she heard it, the faintest snap of a twig, followed by another, closer this time. Kate froze, heart pounding. She scanned the dim brush, every muscle taut. The prairie was never truly silent. Crickets chirped, a mourning dove cooed somewhere beyond the clearing. But layered beneath those gentle sounds was something else. A low, measured rustling, the subtle coordination of many bodies moving as one. Wolves. She knew the signs from her years on the range. A pack, moving in formation, keeping low and out of sight until the last possible second. They'd be hungry. The late spring had been harsh on smaller prey, and wild horses, though not an easy target, were tempting for a desperate pack. Kate's mind spun. The scent of willow and perhaps traces of the wild Mustang had drawn them near. She could almost picture the lean gray shapes ghosting through the grass, eyes gleaming in the fading light. Her hands clenched around the sack of wood, every instinct telling her to run. But she forced herself to move slow and careful. She retraced her steps, fighting to keep her breathing steady. "It's all right," she whispered, though she wasn't sure if she meant it for Willow or for herself. The old mare stood at the edge of camp, ears pinned, body rigid with alarm. Kate saw her stamp nervously, muscles bunched to bolt. That's when she spotted them. 3 shapes gliding low through the grass, almost invisible, their eyes catching the last flickers of light. And then a 4th, then a 5th, shadows swirling out of the gathering darkness, lips drawn back in silent hunger. Kate's heart hammered. She'd heard stories, of course, but she'd never faced down a pack on her own. She scanned the camp for anything that could be used as a weapon. A heavy branch, a shovel, her old hunting knife. The wolves began to circle, spreading out, confident and methodical. They moved with the efficiency of creatures who had done this 100 times, herding their prey, testing for weakness. Willow backed up, tossing her head, letting out a shrill, frightened whinny. Kate rushed to her side, tossing the sack aside. "Easy, girl, I'm right here." She grabbed Willow's rope, trying to project calm even as her mind raced. The wolves advanced, hackles raised, lips curling to reveal sharp white teeth. A wild surge of adrenaline shot through Kate. She reached for her phone, thinking of calling wildlife authorities. But the nearest ranger station was hours away, and her cell had no service out here in the lowlands. She glanced around. The fire was burning low, embers glowing, but the dry kindling she'd gathered could make it flare if needed. Her voice rang out, louder than she expected, cracking the tense silence. "Get out! Go on!" She waved her arms, hurled a stick at the nearest wolf. The animal dodged easily, eyes never leaving her. Another wolf barked, deep and guttural, and the rest echoed, filling the air with chilling song. The pack tightened, closing in, hunger and calculation shining in their wild eyes. Kate's mind ran through every scrap of wisdom she'd ever been taught. Don't run. Look big, make noise, protect your horse at all costs. Willow trembled beside her, wide-eyed and snorting. "Back! Get back!" Kate shouted, grabbing a burning brand from the fire and swinging it wide. Sparks scattered. The wolves hesitated, wary of flame, but still pressed forward, circling, testing her resolve. She realized with icy clarity that she and Willow were alone. She could not wait for help. It was up to her to protect her friend, just as she'd done for Thunder, only now with lives hanging in the balance. She darted to the supply box, found her old bear spray, and clutched it tight. "Not tonight," she muttered, voice steady even as her legs quivered. A wolf lunged, jaws snapping just feet from Willow's flank. Kate let out a fierce yell and sprayed the chemical in a wide arc. The lead wolf yelped, shaking its head, but the others only flinched, their hunger overpowering their fear. She backed toward Willow, guiding the mare with calm hands and gentle murmurs. "It's okay, girl. Stay with me." Her mind raced. If the wolves rushed together, even bear spray might not stop them. She scanned for an escape, but the animals had her nearly surrounded, the fire at her back, open darkness beyond. The pack leader snarled, gathering the others with a guttural call. They tensed, readying for another charge. Kate's body shook with adrenaline and dread. Her vision tunneled, time slowed, every sense sharpened. She could hear Willow's breathing, smell the sharp tang of smoke, feel her own pulse pounding in her ears. She considered running for the truck, but that would mean abandoning Willow. She wouldn't, leave her only friend to a pack of predators. She thought of Thunder, the wild Mustang, and how he'd fought for his freedom. Kate squared her shoulders, determination burning through the fear. "You want to fight?" she growled, brandishing the flaming stick. "Then you'll have to go through me first." The wolves inched closer, their eyes gleaming in the firelight. Kate braced herself, jaw set, heart wild, and in that moment, between courage and despair, hope and terror, she stood tall, refusing to back down, even as the shadows closed in around her. The wolves pressed closer, circling tighter in the dim light, their growls a low, hungry rumble beneath the wide Wyoming sky. Kate's knuckles blanched as she gripped the burning branch, the acrid scent of smoke mixing with the iron tang of fear in her throat. Willow shuddered at her side, hooves dancing nervously, eyes rolling with panic. In that frozen instant, Kate felt utterly alone. A single heartbeat between survival and disaster, her world balanced on a knife edge. Then a sound split the night. It started as a thunder of hooves far beyond the firelight, pounding swift and wild across the open prairie. Kate's breath caught. For a moment, she thought the storm was returning, but the sky overhead was clear, a dark tapestry of stars. The ground itself trembled as the hoofbeats drew closer, echoing through the bones of the land. The wolves froze, ears pricked, uncertain, the pack leader pausing mid-step. From the shadows beyond camp, a black and white form exploded into view, mane flying, muscles coiled in raw power. It was Thunder. He surged from the darkness like a living storm, every inch of him fierce and wild, his coat flashing silver under the moon. The broken chain Kate had cut days before still trailed from one hind leg, but it no longer slowed him. He wore it now like a badge of survival. Thunder did not hesitate. He charged straight at the pack, screaming a battle cry that sliced through the night. His hooves struck the earth like hammers. The nearest wolf yelped and darted aside, nearly tumbling over itself. Thunder lunged again, ears flat, teeth bared, and slammed his forelegs down inches from a wolf's snout. Dust and sparks flew. The wolves scrambled, tripping over each other, eyes wide with terror at this sudden, untamed fury. Kate gasped, her fear twisting into awe. She'd seen wild horses defend their own before, but never a Mustang this bold, this deliberate. Thunder reared, nostrils flared, and slashed the air with his hooves. He circled the campfire, placing himself between Kate, Willow, and the snapping jaws. The wolves hesitated, unsure for the first time. Their formation broken, the pack leader snarled and tried to rally the others, darting in with bared fangs. Thunder spun and kicked, the chain whipping behind him, striking sparks from a stone. The wolf yelped, retreating with a bloody gash across its muzzle. The other wolves lost their nerve. One by one, they melted back into the brush, glancing over their shoulders with wary, yellow eyes. Thunder stood his ground, chest heaving, his breath steaming in the cool air. For a moment, the prairie was still except for his pounding heart and Kate's ragged breaths. The pack lingered at the edge of darkness, but Thunder met their gaze, ours pinned, daring them to come any closer. Finally, the wolves slunk away, the leader limping, their hunger defeated by a force even wilder than themselves. Silence fell, heavy and absolute, broken only by the crackle of the fire and Willow's trembling sighs. Kate stared, barely able to believe what she'd witnessed. "Thunder," she whispered, voice choked with gratitude and disbelief. The Mustang turned toward her, sides heaving, sweat darkening his flanks. His eyes, once so frightened, now blazed with intelligence and recognition. He had not forgotten the human who'd freed him. She stepped forward, cautious but desperate to thank him. Thunder stamped a hoof, as if to warn her, but did not bolt. He snorted, tossing his head, mane wild and tangled. Yet there was no fear, only wariness and a flicker of something like trust. Kate knelt slowly, lowering the burning branch and letting it smolder harmlessly in the grass. She opened her palms, showing she meant no harm, her heart thundering louder than the Mustang's hooves. "You came back. You saved us." Thunder shivered, the adrenaline of battle still crackling through his powerful frame. Willow inched closer, sensing the danger had passed, her own fear melting into curiosity. The campfire cast long shadows across Thunder's coat, highlighting the marks left by the chain and fresh scratches from the fight. Kate's gaze softened. She saw the wounds, blood beading at his shoulder, a shallow cut along his flank, and the battered look in his eyes. He had risked everything, coming back for the very human who'd cut him free. Kate's throat tightened. She remembered her promise not to force, not to tame, to only ever offer respect and care. She remained kneeling, speaking in the same gentle voice she'd used the night she rescued him. "It's all right now, boy. You did it. You scared them off." She let her words drift on the wind, soothing as the prairie itself. Thunder's ears flicked toward her, and after a moment, he stepped just a little closer, close enough for the firelight to catch the sheen of sweat on his shoulder. Kate fought the urge to reach out. Instead, she waited, letting Thunder choose. She watched him study Willow, then the wolves' fading tracks, then finally meet her gaze. Something passed between them, a silent recognition, a bond forged not by possession, but by courage and kindness. Minutes slipped by as the night settled. The prairie, still trembling from the chaos, grew calm once more. Thunder didn't leave. He remained near the campfire, his sides gradually slowing, his breaths growing quieter. He watched over Kate and Willow, never fully relaxing, but no longer on the edge of panic. Kate swallowed the lump in her throat. Tears threatened, but she blinked them away. "Thank you, Thunder," she said softly. "You're a true wild spirit." She let the words stand as both praise and farewell, just in case he decided to vanish again into the night. But Thunder didn't move. He shifted, easing the weight off his wounded side, standing guard as the stars wheeled overhead and the last flames flickered down to embers. For the first time in days, Kate felt something like hope bloom in her chest. The wild horse she'd freed had become her protector, not out of obligation, but by choice. In the wild's strange, beautiful way, Thunder had given her the gift of his trust. The wolves would not return that night. Willow, reassured, lowered her head to graze. Kate wrapped herself in her blanket and watched Thunder, his silhouette bold against the moonlight, standing as sentinel until the dawn. The world was changed. So was she. Night clung softly to the Wyoming prairie, the kind of night that blurs the line between memory and dream. The campfire had burned low, reduced to a gentle halo of orange embers. Willow was curled close to the truck, quietly cropping at tufts of grass, her panic spent and replaced by contented exhaustion. Kate Morgan sat beside the fire ring, her knees pulled up to her chest, a faded blanket around her shoulders, and Thunder, the wild Mustang who had just risked everything to protect them, remained just beyond the firelight, his powerful body tense and wary, but no longer distant. The adrenaline of survival faded into a deep, vibrating tiredness. Kate found herself studying Thunder with new eyes. Even in half-shadow, she could see the dark line of blood trickling down his shoulder, the fresh scratches along his flanks, and the trembling in his haunches left by the night's ordeal. Her heart ached. She knew enough about horses to recognize pain, even in the wildest of them. For a while, she simply watched him breathe, each inhale ragged and shallow, each exhale a shudder that sent moonlit dust swirling from his battered hide. She said nothing, refusing to break the fragile peace now settling over their camp. The prairie, too, seemed to sense the shift. Coyotes yipped far in the distance, but their cries were softer, more hesitant now that Thunder stood watch. Slowly, Kate reached for her battered saddlebag and pulled out her first aid kit. She'd tended to hundreds of animals before, racehorses, rodeo broncs, even the occasional mountain lion rescued from a trap. But nothing had ever felt as delicate as this. The distance between her and Thunder felt like an ocean. She took a deep breath, steadying her nerves, and spoke softly into the night. "Hey, big guy. I can help you if you'll let me. That cut on your shoulder looks bad, and I know you're hurting." She moved with exaggerated slowness, every motion deliberate and gentle, keeping herself as small and unthreatening as possible. Thunder flicked his ears but didn't back away. His gaze never left her, not even as she opened a bottle of antiseptic and soaked a strip of clean cloth. She set everything within arm's reach, then paused, giving him time to make his choice. She didn't dare try to bribe him with food. This trust would have to come from somewhere deeper than hunger. Kate waited, listening to her own breath, to the crackle of the embers, to the distant heartbeat of the land itself. Thunder snorted softly, head lowering, his body still tense but now vibrating with curiosity instead of fear. "Easy. Just a little closer, that's it," Kate murmured. "I won't tie you. I won't trap you. You can leave whenever you want. I just want to help." She stretched her hand out, palm open, the soaked cloth dangling. But a moment, it seemed Thunder would bolt, but he only stamped his good foreleg, blowing air through his nose as if weighing the risk. Then, as if compelled by something neither of them could explain, Thunder stepped forward, one hoof, then another, until his head was level with Kate's knees. The world narrowed to the space between them, a sliver of trust forged by danger and shared need. Kate's hand shook as she pressed the cloth gently to the wound on Thunder's shoulder. The Mustang flinched, teeth bared in protest, but did not strike or run. He stood his ground, muscles rigid as steel, and allowed her to clean away the blood. "That's it. You're all right," Kate soothed. She dabbed carefully at the cut, rinsing it with cool water from her canteen, then smeared a bit of ointment along the gash. Each step was an act of faith for both of them. Thunder had to accept her touch, and Kate had to trust that her presence wouldn't break his wild spirit. She moved to the scratches on his flank, whispering a steady stream of nonsense. Old rodeo jokes, stories about Willow, and half-forgotten lullabies. Her voice was steady, a rope of calm tying them together through the prairie darkness. Thunder's ears twitched with every word, his breathing gradually slowing as the sting of the medicine faded. At one point, Kate's fingers brushed against the scar from the chain she had cut days before. She paused, feeling a lump rise in her throat. "I'm sorry for all of it," she murmured, voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry for the pain people have given you. You deserved better, Thunder." For a long moment, Thunder simply stood there, still, silent, his body glowing in the fire's halo. Kate felt his wildness as something tangible, like the rush of wind before a storm. Yet underneath that wildness was something else, the faintest thread of trust, fragile but unbroken. She finished tending his wounds, then sat back on her heels and exhaled shakily. "All done, boy. That's all I can do for you tonight. The rest, well, that's up to you." She left the first aid kit open on the ground, just in case Thunder chose to return. She looked up at the sky, where 1,000 stars blazed undimmed. The night air was sharp and alive, every sound and scent magnified by adrenaline and relief. Willow grazed peacefully, seemingly reassured by Thunder's presence. The old mare even edged closer, stretching her neck to sniff at Thunder, who responded with a wary but respectful snort. Kate let herself relax, just a little, her muscles finally unclenching after hours of fear. She gathered her blanket tighter, feeling exhaustion threaten to pull her under. But sleep would not come easily, not with so much adrenaline still in her blood, not with Thunder's story still unfinished. For the first time since the night she'd cut him free, Thunder didn't vanish into the darkness. Instead, he circled the perimeter of the camp, checking the shadows for lingering predators. Satisfied, he stepped within the ring of firelight and lowered himself carefully to the grass. He stayed facing Kate and Willow, always alert, always half wild, but present in a way that made Kate's heart swell. She watched as he settled, eyelids drooping, breath deep and even. The prairie around them seemed to draw in, forming a gentle cocoon of safety and peace. For a few precious hours, they were no longer adversaries or strangers, but companions sharing the ancient promise of firelight and trust. Kate whispered a prayer of thanks to the stars, then let her own eyes drift shut. When she woke at dawn, Thunder was still there, resting close enough for her to hear his heartbeat, proof that sometimes even the wildest spirits can choose trust over fear. Morning arrived as a pale golden wash over the endless Wyoming prairie. The storm, the danger, the night's frantic energy, it all seemed impossibly distant now. Birds sang in the willows, and the scent of sage drifted on a gentle breeze. The first light crept into Kate's camp, brushing the world with new hope and the quiet promise of another beginning. Kate stirred awake, wrapped in her blanket beneath the open sky. For a moment she thought she'd dreamed it all, the wolves, Thunder's return, the tense hours of trust and healing. But then she saw the tracks in the dew-damp grass and the faint indentation where a Mustang had rested not far from her fire. Willow nickered softly, dozing in the early sun. And there, just at the edge of the clearing, stood Thunder, black and white, shining in the dawn. For a heartbeat, Kate dared not move. The Mustang's mane fluttered in the breeze, his silhouette sharp and bold against the light. He seemed almost unreal, a creature made of wind and wildness, balanced between two worlds, the safety of the campfire's ring and the limitless freedom of the hills. She watched him, heart aching with something between pride and loss. Thunder looked back at her, dark eyes clear and bright. The wounds she'd tended were already scabbing over. He stood straighter, stronger, more himself. For the first time since she'd freed him, Kate saw not a creature running from pain, but a being full of life, his spirit untamed, his choices finally his own. "Good morning, Thunder," Kate whispered, barely loud enough to reach him. She didn't get up or move closer. Instead, she sat quietly, hoping he'd understand that this too was a kind of respect, a promise not to trap him, not to claim him, but to honor his wildness. Thunder pawed the earth, nose quivering as he caught the scent of the open land. His ears flicked, catching every subtle sound, the trill of a meadowlark, the distant cry of a hawk, the steady breath of willow behind him. He took a step toward Kate, paused, then shifted his weight as if torn by some invisible thread. Kate remembered every lesson her own life had carved into her bones. Freedom isn't the absence of love. Sometimes it's the deepest kind, choosing to let go, even when your heart wants to hold on. She let her eyes linger on Thunder, willing him to know that whatever he decided, she would be at peace. She watched as he circled the camp one last time, nose to the ground, checking for danger or simply memorizing the place. He approached Willow, their breaths mingling in a soft puff of fog. Willow accepted him without fear, the bond of the night's ordeal holding strong. Thunder brushed his nose against the mare's flank, a wordless thank you, perhaps, then turned to face the sunrise. Kate's chest tightened as Thunder took a few slow steps toward the open hills. He paused at the meadow's edge, turning to look back at her. Their eyes met, human and Mustang, both marked by the night's scars, both changed by what they'd survived. In that gaze, Kate saw gratitude, memory, and something like forgiveness. She lifted her hand in silent farewell. "Go on, Thunder. Be free. That's what you were born for." For a moment, Thunder seemed to hesitate, caught between comfort and instinct, between the warmth of trust and the call of the wild. But then the breeze shifted, bringing with it the rich scents of sage, earth, and freedom. Thunder tossed his head, mane flying, and in a single fluid motion, he broke into a gallop, hooves churning up the dew, muscles rippling with new strength, heart beating to the rhythm of his own destiny. Kate watched him go, her throat thick with emotion, The Mustang became a streak of black and white among the golden hills, shrinking with every stride, yet somehow filling the world with his presence. At the crest of the meadow, Thunder stopped, silhouetted against the rising sun. He turned one last time, his figure backlit, wild and magnificent. Their eyes met again, this time across a gulf not of fear or need, but of understanding. Thunder dipped his head, as if to acknowledge the woman who'd fought for his life, and the woman who'd set him free. Then he wheeled, vanishing into the wild with a grace no human could ever own. The prairie felt changed in his absence. Not emptier, but richer. Kate sat in the grass, letting the morning breeze wash over her, the taste of bittersweet joy lingering on her tongue. Tears pricked her eyes, not of grief, but of wonder. She knew she'd done the hardest thing, loved enough to let go. Willow ambled over and nuzzled Kate's shoulder. Kate stroked her mare's soft muzzle, grateful for her steady company. "We did good, didn't we, girl?" she murmured, voice shaky with pride. "We let him choose. That's all anyone can ask for." For a long time, Kate remained where she was, listening to the world wake up. She heard distant thunder, not the horse, but the rumble of new weather moving far to the west. The land felt full of promise, as if anything could happen. Kate let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, the wild had forgiven her. For her past mistakes, for the times she'd tried to control what was never hers. She packed up camp with careful hands, each movement measured and slow. She didn't rush. There was no need. Thunder was gone, yes, but his spirit lingered, a thread woven into the fabric of the prairie, a reminder that some bonds transcend distance and time. Before leaving, Kate returned to the spot where Thunder had stood, pressing her hand into the dew-wet grass. She closed her eyes and offered a silent prayer, for Thunder's safety, for the wisdom to do right by every wild soul, and for the courage to always choose compassion over possession. As she mounted Willow and turned toward the long road home, Kate looked back one last time at the rolling hills. There was no sign of Thunder, but she smiled through her tears. She knew, deep down, that the greatest gift she could give, had already given, was freedom. The prairie shimmered with light and promise, and Kate rode on, her heart a little lighter, her spirit forever marked by a wild friend who had taught her what it meant to truly love and let go. The drive home was quiet, the hum of tires on gravel roads offering a kind of comfort that words could not. Kate Morgan let the windows down, letting the crisp Wyoming air fill the cab and whip through her hair. Willow, tethered in the trailer behind, shuffled quietly, tired but unhurt after the ordeal. The prairie stretched on either side, rolling and endless, painted gold in the late afternoon sun. Kate's heart was a strange mixture of sorrow and relief. Every bump in the road seemed to shake loose another memory from the days and nights she'd spent with Thunder. The desperate rescue in the storm, the terror of the wolves, the fragile trust built under 1,000 stars. She replayed those moments like precious stones, turning them over and over in her mind. With every mile, the ache of loss softened, replaced by a hard-earned sense of peace. Back in town, life resumed its familiar rhythms. Kate's little house stood at the edge of a dusty lane, half hidden by cottonwoods and the long shadows of late spring. She unloaded Willow, who headed straight for her patch of sweet grass, and stowed her battered gear by the door. The normalcy felt almost strange, too quiet, too still, as if the wildness of Thunder lingered, just out of sight. Kate spent the next day cleaning her tack, patching her boots and catching up on chores neglected during her time in the hills. But she couldn't keep the story of Thunder to herself. That afternoon, when her neighbor Ben Hall wandered by, Kate called him over for coffee on the porch. Ben settled into the creaky old rocker, mug in hand, and listened as Kate told the tale. She spared no details: Thunder's suffering, the storm, the rescue, the wolves, the moment when she let him go free. Ben's weathered face shifted through surprise, skepticism, and finally a quiet respect. "Sounds like you went and found a piece of yourself out there with that horse," Ben said when she finished. "Not everyone would have let him go." Kate nodded, staring into her mug. "I spent half my life breaking wild horses. I thought I was helping them. But I see it differently now. A real love isn't about keeping someone close, but letting them be who they're meant to be, even if that means watching them run away." Ben grunted, scratching his beard. "You know, folks around here talk a lot about the right way to deal with Mustangs. Most think you ought to rope them, brand them, put them to work. But there's not many who'd say the right way is just letting them go." Kate's gaze grew distant, focused on a place far beyond the horizon. "Maybe that's what I needed to learn. It wasn't about saving Thunder for me. It was about giving him a choice and letting myself be changed by it." Word spread quickly, as things do in small towns. Within days, friends and neighbors began stopping by the feed store or catching Kate at the post office, asking after the Mustang story. Some were dismissive at first, calling it foolish, saying wild horses were nothing but trouble. But many listened, truly listened, to the lesson beneath her words. One morning, the local elementary school teacher invited Kate to share her story with a class of third graders. Kate arrived, a little nervous, but as she spoke, the children's eyes grew wide, faces full of wonder and hope. She told them about the storm, the pain in Thunder's eyes, and the courage it took to set him free. She watched as one boy, usually shy and withdrawn, raised his hand and asked, "Did Thunder come back to say thank you?" Kate smiled, heart warm. "He came back to save me when I needed it most. That's the best thank you I could have ever wished for. But mostly, he taught me that real friendship isn't about owning someone. It's about respecting their spirit and trusting them to find their own way." The kids nodded, and for a moment Kate saw something bright flicker in their faces, a new respect for wildness, for kindness, for the courage it takes to let go. Back at home, Kate kept reflecting. Each evening she'd sit on her back porch, journal in hand, watching the light fade across the prairie. She wrote about the past, her rodeo days, the horses she'd broken, the pride and regret woven together in every memory. But now her words were softer, more forgiving. June 20th, home. Sometimes, the best thing you can do for someone is set them free. Thunder taught me that. So did Willow, in her gentle way. I can't undo the past, but I can choose better now. Real compassion means putting someone else's needs above your own desires. Redemption isn't just for horses. Kate's sense of redemption was subtle, not a dramatic epiphany, but a slow thawing of her heart. She realized she could forgive herself for what she hadn't known then, for the well-meaning mistakes and the pride of youth. She'd been changed, not just by Thunder's trust, but by the lesson his freedom had given her. A week passed. One evening, as dusk painted the sky with violet and gold, Kate sat quietly, sipping tea and watching the horizon. Willow grazed by the fence, ears twitching at the smallest sound. The world felt full of possibility, and Kate felt ready. Ready to embrace a new way of being with the wild. Ready to teach others what Thunder had taught her. Sometimes when the wind shifted just so, Kate would think she heard hooves pounding on distant hills, or catch the glimpse of a black and white figure in the tall grass. Maybe it was only hope, or maybe it was Thunder himself, checking in from afar. Either way, Kate smiled, content in the knowledge that their bond had changed them both. The next time she saw Ben, he grinned and nudged her arm. "You know, I heard a couple folks say they spotted your Mustang out by the river at sunset. Wild as ever, but not afraid. Maybe you started something good." Kate laughed, genuine and free. "Maybe I did. Or maybe thunder started something in me." That night, she wrote one last note in her journal before turning in. Redemption is earned, not given. True compassion is letting someone find their own way, even if it means you have to let go. And as the stars blinked on overhead, Kate felt lighter than she had in years, her heart open to whatever wild beauty tomorrow might bring. Summer deepened on the Wyoming prairie, painting the hills with the golden dust of tall grass and wildflowers. The days grew long and warm, the nights gentle with soft wind and cricket song. Kate Morgan moved through the rhythm of small-town life with a new sense of belonging, a lightness in her step, a quiet smile that hinted at something hard-won and beautiful deep inside. Weeks passed since Thunder's departure, yet Kate found that her story was far from over. In the evenings, when the sky blazed with the last fire of sunset, she sometimes caught a flash of movement near the river, just beyond the fence where the grass grew high. The first time she froze, heart thudding. There, outlined against the dusk, stood Thunder, wild and strong, his coat a banner of black and white. He didn't approach, but he didn't hide either. He lingered just long enough for Kate to catch his eye and tip her hat in quiet greeting. Sometimes Willow would lift her head from the grass and nicker softly at Thunder, and for a moment the two horses would stand nose to nose on opposite sides of the fence, silent witnesses to a bond that needed no words. Kate watched them, the ache of missing Thunder slowly changing to a grateful joy. His spirit was still here, woven into every sunrise, every patch of wildflowers, every gust of prairie wind. Word of Thunder spread through the valley. Neighbors reported seeing him running with a small band of wild Mustangs, sometimes alone, sometimes leading the way across distant ridges. The school children, who had once listened wide-eyed to Kate's story, now pointed excitedly whenever they glimpsed him from the school bus window. "That's Thunder!" they'd shout, faces bright with wonder. "That's the wild horse Miss Morgan saved!" Kate began to notice a change in her community. Where people once spoke only of rounding up Mustangs or keeping wild things at arm's length, now they talked of balance, of leaving room for the wild, of respecting what could never be fully tamed. Ben Hall, who once shook his head at Kate's stubborn compassion, started volunteering with a local group to monitor wild horse herds and teach kids about coexistence. The town's annual rodeo even held a new event, a wild freedom parade where local horses, both tame and Mustang, paraded together, led by the children Kate had inspired. Kate herself became a quiet source of guidance. People came to her not just for veterinary advice, but for wisdom on how to approach the wild things in their lives: troubled horses, lost pets, even lost souls. She never gave pat answers. Instead, she listened deeply, then shared the lesson Thunder had carved into her heart. Real friendship isn't about ownership. It's about respect, kindness, and the courage to let go when it's needed most. Her own life blossomed in unexpected ways. She spent more time with Willow, riding out to places she'd once hurried past. She watched the play of sunlight through cottonwoods, learned the names of birds she'd ignored in her younger, busier days. She felt the edges of her own wildness, no longer something to hide or suppress, but something to celebrate. When storms swept in from the west, Kate welcomed the thunder and wind, no longer seeing them as threats, but as reminders of the wild horse who'd changed her life. Sometimes, on cool evenings, She'd sit on her porch and write letters she'd never send, to the girl she used to be, to the horses she'd once tried to break, to Thunder himself. She thanked them for their lessons, their grace, and their forgiveness. Dear Thunder, you gave me a second chance. You taught me to see the world with new eyes, to love without holding tight, and to trust that letting go doesn't mean losing something, but honoring it. Run wild, friend. May your hooves always find open ground. Her words weren't just for herself. They found their way into talks at the local school, at rancher meetings, in coffee shop conversations with friends who struggled to forgive or to set boundaries. Little by little, Kate noticed a shift, not just in attitudes about wild horses, but in how people treated each other. There was more patience, more curiosity, less judgment. The story of Thunder became a touchstone, a way for folks to talk about second chances and the beauty of trust. And Thunder, well, he remained a legend. On warm, dusky nights, people said you could still see him at the edge of the fields, mane flying in the breeze, a ghost and a guardian both. Sometimes, when Kate walked the old fence line, she'd leave an apple on a post. Once in a while, by morning, it was gone, the grass trampled by hooves and marked by the faintest echo of a whinny on the wind. As summer drifted toward autumn, Kate felt a quiet contentment settle into her bones. She was no longer the restless woman she'd been, searching for redemption in the open wild. She had found it. Earned, not by taming or owning, but by honoring what she could never claim. The legacy of Thunder was everywhere, in the laughter of children, the pride of her community, the wild beauty of the prairie at dawn. On her last ride before the first snows, Kate paused atop a hill and looked out across the sea of grass. Somewhere, she knew, Thunder was out there, free, unbroken, forever wild. She closed her eyes and whispered a final blessing. The greatest friendships set us free. Redemption is earned through respect, kindness, and the courage to let go. As the wind lifted her words and carried them across the hills, Kate turned for home, her heart light, her spirit wild, and her story, Thunder's story, woven into the land for anyone who believed in hope, freedom, and trust. If you believe in second chances and the beauty of wild bonds, like and subscribe for more stories of hope, freedom, and trust.